Hello, everybody. Welcome back from lunch. I'm John Gapper, and welcome to a session where we're going to consider what happens in the incredibly unlikely situation where a television show runs into a media storm involving a well-known celebrity. Who'd have thought it? But we're not going to address the elephant in the studio. Instead, we have a fictional scenario that's going to test our very distinguished panel and also test you, because we're going to draw on your expertise. So to do this, you have to prepare now. You need to either call up the Convention app on your phones or download it, go to the live discussion section, and then click on polls within the crisis session, which is this one. When I ask questions, but not before, click on your answer. The instructions to download the app are in the program. And if you don't have a mobile phone, you've got time to go out and buy one before we start. Meanwhile, here are the panel. I will say that the panel has clearly not got the media executive memo, because the men are all wearing polished leather shoes, and Helen's wearing a rather fetching boot. However, I am wearing stripy socks, so I fit in to that extent. Now, our panel are Greg Dyke, the former CEO of London Weekend Television and Director General of the BBC, who knows a thing or two about crisis. Caroline Kean, consultant partner at Wiggin, the solicitors. Her firm describes her as a tenacious advocate and negotiator. I'm not sure what her husband describes her as. And we also have the former journalist and communications expert Andy Coulson, founder of Coulson Partners, the consultancy. Andy knows quite a bit about crisis from inside various institutions, including the News of the World, where he was editor, 10 Downing Street, where he was advisor to David Cameron, and Hollesley Bay Prison in Suffolk, following the phone hacking crisis. By the way, Andy has a very, very interesting and I find fascinating series about managing personal, podcast series about managing personal and professional crises, so I definitely recommend it. Let me begin by setting out our scenario. Star Maker, a big entertainment show, is heading for its live final. There are 3 star judges, Fred, Bill, and Alice. Alice tells the executive producer she has a personal crisis relating to a teenage daughter with mental health issues. In the last series, she had to miss a pre-recorded show when the girl had problems. The press office at that time issued a statement saying that one of her children was unwell, and quoting Alice as saying that she had to put her job as a mother first. The story ran in the media as put out by the broadcaster. But things have escalated, and the girl, who's now 17, is in hospital. Alice feels it would be too difficult for her to appear in the live final of Star Maker. She tells the producer what's happening, but she wants to protect her daughter's privacy, understandably. Alice has herself had problems with alcohol in the past. Now, Caroline, you're the legal advisor to the broadcaster. There's clearly an issue coming up here. What are the privacy issues that the broadcaster should be considering?
And the first one, obviously, is the daughter's privacy. She's not well, and that is going to be the primary concern for the broadcaster. The second one is Alice. And
sorry, on that point then, and her age?
Her age is 17. She is still a minor. A number of the codes, the IPSO code and so on, refer to 16 as being the limit for intrusion, but she would still be treated as a minor, and as an individual, even if she was an adult, her mental health, her well-being, is a matter of the utmost privacy. As the quasi or maybe actual employer, the broadcaster, has a duty of care to Alice, to respect her trust and confidence. They have obviously got to weigh this in the balance against the interest of the show, the interest of the other judges, But looking after Alice is going to be the primary concern.
So Alice has said she wants this to remain private, and the broadcaster has the duty of care to her and to her daughter.
That's correct, but obviously the producer isn't a magician. You know, this story has already been out there. You've got the live final coming up.
Right.
She
and there's also there's in the past been a story about her daughter. So Greg, what do you think? You're the broadcast exec. What's going through your mind, apart from oh dear?
Exactly that. And who's going to, if she's not going to do the final, who is? So that's a.
But is it quite a simple decision at this point? It's like.
What, that she doesn't do it?
Yeah.
It will be, I suspect that someone will try and persuade her to do it, and she'll probably say, no, I can't do it. And you've got to make that judgment then.
So it's decided that Alice will be replaced in the live final in 2 days' time, but that means a public announcement. So Andy and Greg, this is going to be big news. What are you going to say? What should the broadcaster say?
I think as little as possible. I think you go back to absolute, golden rule in the sort of process of putting a statement together. What do we need to say rather than what do we want to say, or what do others want to say? There's a mistake earlier that does affect, I think, the thinking around this. The mistake is that in an earlier statement, the child was referenced.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean that it's open season. Everything that's been covered already is absolutely the case. It doesn't swing any other doors open, but it might well colour the kind of conversations that you're going to want to have in the future. So I would not link it to that statement. I would start again, and I would go with a phrasing around private family issue, something along those lines. But keep it to the absolute minimum. Yeah. And the other rule of statement writing that I like to follow is just remove all drama. Right? Write your statement, leave it alone, come back, and on every single word, is this increasing or decreasing?
But, from the media point of view, you used to work at the News of the World. Presumably the job is to add the drama straight back.
Of course, but you've not got control of that. You have got control of your statement. Right. And that's the golden rule, actually, when you're in any kind of crisis, is work out what you've got control of and what you don't, and concentrate on the things that you do.
And Greg, you're going to issue a statement. Who do you have to contact, and which are the stakeholders here that sort of need to be told before you actually put out a statement?
Well, you'd obviously have to tell, the production team will know, you'd obviously have to tell the other presenters. You'd obviously have to get a replacement. But, Andy's dead right. You'd say there's a family difficulty, you've got to be sympathetic to that, and that's it, full stop.
Yeah.
That's why she's not doing it. You wouldn't mention the daughter. As you say, it's probably a mistake to have mentioned her last time because she's in the...
Right.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't mention the daughter. You just say there's a family problem. She's therefore not going to be able to do the show. And if you've got it organised, then you'd announce who's doing it instead at the same time, because that's the bigger story then.
Yeah, sorry, the other thing I'd add is in these situations, it is all about relationships to the media, but also with the talent. And you've just got to try and build that trust. So I think actually before I spoke to any or started communicating with any stakeholders, I'd be sitting down with Alice and saying, well, what do you want? Maybe even asking, how are you? Have you got everything you need around you? Well, it's a bit of a cliche, I know, but it's the truth, right? You need to know how she is. It's really important strategically to know exactly how she is.
Right.
She might not be getting what she needs.
Yeah, and what emotional.
And that's the first thing.
Okay, so the media statement goes out, the phones start ringing. One journalist calls the press office to say an insider has told him that Alice is back on the bottle, and he asks for comment. Here we are.
Hi, it's Tim Penman here from the Daily News. I'm just calling to get some clarity on whether Alice will be taking part in the live final. I've heard from several production sources that she's not around at the moment. One of my sources has suggested that she might be struggling with drinking again because of some personal issues that she's having to manage. Obviously, any change in the lineup to the show's judges is a big story, so I wanted to give you a chance to comment. We're planning on running the story online and in print tomorrow.
Okay, well, he's actually been quite generous rather than saying we're going to run it online in an hour's time. But Greg and Caroline, do you need to make another statement, Greg?
What story is he running?
Well, we think he might run a story saying, suggesting at least, maybe even putting it in the headline that Alice is drinking, and that's the reason.
I think, well, if we're saying there is a family problem, we've said that. I don't think you would run the story that she's drinking. Do you?
I don't if what we've already discussed has been well executed.
Yes.
Because he knows actually he's dealing with a story about a 17-year-old
It's
child.
a little bit, the phone call's a little bit like I've got one person saying it.
Yeah. And what evidence has he got? One person?
Yeah.
Have we got a legal position?
Meanwhile, behind the scenes, I'm trying to get to grips with what's been out there in the past about her drinking. You know, has she actually had trouble? Have there been photographs? Is the stuff that they're going to be digging up? What do we need to know? What
How
do we
much
need to
do they
prepare
know?
for? Yeah. And the other thing I'd be looking at is you've got a leak.
And when you're looking at it as a lawyer, are you sort of going to Alice and saying, look, tell me everything? Or
No,
what
not
do you do?
necessarily. I mean, at the moment, what I want to do is find out what I can find out. You know, has it all been publicly discussed in the past? Are they going to be able to say that this is already out there, it's not private? I mean, again, drinking...
So will that be a
private.
legal defence? If they go to drinking and you say, well, it's private, and they say, well, you put out a statement in the past, you made it legitimate.
I don't think that we've put out a statement. I get the sense from this that actually she's been caught drinking in the past. There's probably been a story out there. It isn't an answer for them to say the story's been out there in the past, but it's usually the opening line, that it's not private anymore because it's already out in the public domain. So I'd be trying to find out for myself what's out there, what have we got to deal with, what do we need to talk to you guys about, what might be coming.
Well, let's put Andy back
Yeah.
to an earlier world as you're running the news of the world.
Do you have to, Greg?
Would you run?
Only if you insist.
Would you run the story that she's been drinking? That one person says she's drinking?
No, you need to establish the facts, right? I think the fact that there is...
By the way, Andy, is there a difference between the news of the world in the past and all...
Well, it doesn't exist. There's a big difference.
Well, and the news of the world today. On Sunday. Has the legal environment significantly changed?
Yeah, absolutely. The last 20 years have been seismic in change.
Yeah.
We were talking about this earlier. Actually, it goes back a little bit further than that. If you go back to the early Blair years, were very kind of influential on precisely this kind of scenario, right?
Right. Well, it was just sketchier, both legally and in terms of what people would push.
Yeah, but I think on the issue of children, and I think on the issue of mental health, I think that's been pretty clear for quite some time. It was clear during my time, right?
Right.
2000, early 2000s.
And what about
For sure.
alcohol?
This is more confused, right? Because we're not clear whether there might have been stories published before. Well, what does that mean exactly? Did she involve herself in those stories? Was she giving interviews? Did she?
I'm going to assume that
engage in
she
it.
was caught drinking, or it was well known, or there were reports. But the real issue in terms of is to do with there was a statement about the girl.
Yeah,
So that's an issue.
Yeah, but look, there's been another, which I think is important in this. It's about relationships, right? Often in crisis, it's about relationships.
Right.
Who knows who can talk to who in a way that's kind of got some trust around it.
Right.
A journalist who understands what background briefing is and what off the record is, and that's very difficult now because those relationships have changed, right? They've really fundamentally changed.
Are you saying that journalists have become less trustworthy?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the ability actually to build relationships between organisations like TV companies and journalists is much more difficult now.
Because of speed, because of...
Well, partly because of technology and speed and all the rest of it, but actually also, frankly, because of budgets, right? When I was a showbiz reporter, which is how I started as a reporter, the BBC were paying to put me on a plane and send me to Miami to spend 5 days writing about the Only Fools and Horses Christmas special.
Right.
Now, those 5 days were quite an interesting trip, great fun, and we got some spreads, the BBC were very happy, but I was also spending time with the BBC press office.
Right.
I got to know them. I was, friendship perhaps an overstretch, but we got to know each other.
So there was something you could call.
Yeah, and so when difficult stories come along, you can have a conversation.
Assuming they've run the press office of the broadcaster, we're assuming for this scenario is also the production company, I think the press office will first of all say, oh, come off it, mate.
Yeah.
Come off it. You're not going to run that on the basis of one allegation. And I think the journalist would I think if the journalist didn't do that, I think his bosses would say, his or her bosses would say, yeah, look, come on, this is a bit thin.
Yeah.
All right.
The other thing
We've actually got hold on. No, carry on.
The only other thing on that is you've got a leak from the production people. And though you've got to handle it, allegedly, though you've got to handle it very carefully, you might want to say something to the production team about being very careful not to stir up.
Right. Okay, we're having another dramatic development. Andy's actually been contacted now by Alice, who said she'd like him to represent her personally, rather than representing the broadcaster. And so, in your role as a consultant, Alice calls you up and says, I want my own advisor. What do you advise her?
On the basis it's proper for me to do so, and I don't have a contractual issue. Yeah. It's a version really of what I said earlier. I'd want to have a conversation that's geared towards understanding the facts and building some trust between us, and asking the most important question of all: what do we want to end up with here? Actually, what is it that we want to end up with? And I imagine the answer to that question will be: I want my daughter to be protected and to not end up in the media, right? And that's then your guiding line.
And do you think at that point, do you ask her, well, are you getting nervous about the broadcast, or why are you calling me?
I think the conversation that conversation to build trust has got to kind of cover it all. And you've also got to, which is sometimes a difficult conversation, is you've got to make sure that no one else, she's not talking to other people who are then talking to the media on her behalf.
Have you asked us if you can represent her?
Oh no, I said if it's contractually proper.
Yeah. But we'd probably let you. We probably would not have a problem.
Yeah, it would be quite unusual, I think, if I was already in your employ.
Yeah.
I would have thought, but yeah. Anyway.
All right. So far,
the key word here, I think, is trust. Right, and then the second thing for me is working out actually what do you want. So, for example, Alice may take the view, I don't care if they're running stories about, suggesting that I'm back on the bottle, as long as they're not running stories about my daughter, because that's all I care about.
Okay, so that's
your job, Andy.
Right.
Stop that from happening.
So, and Alice, Alice is a professional, so she understands that there could be different stories. Okay, so far we're having a very, calm, balanced discussion. At which point the ex-husband appears. Alice's ex-husband, after a difficult divorce, is approached for comment. He puts out a tweet, or an X, or whatever you call them these days, saying, the chickens always come home to roost. There it is. He's also called Zane, which is slightly suspicious. Now, this tweet prompts a load of online speculation, including claims on social media that Alice is drinking again. And, as we know, it's a bit hard to actually control social media. The media picks up this story. So, Andy, what do you do now?
Well, we're assuming that Zane is the father of the daughter.
I think we're assuming that, unless Caroline wants to throw another issue into the the mix.
On the basis that he is, his behaviour here is essentially, invading his own daughter's privacy. So you've got to find a way to get that message.
Is he invading his daughter's privacy, or is he invading his wife's privacy?
Absolutely.
Ex-wife.
In my view, absolutely, because it's all knock-on effect, right? What you're doing, you're creating an even greater drama.
Right.
When presumably he knows the truth, that this is actually not about her drinking, it's about their daughter. So that message has got to be good.
So he might be angry about the daughter.
You've got to get that message to him, in my view. But I don't think you say...
To him?
Yeah, but I don't think you say or do anything publicly, is my view.
No, I agree.
But sorry, when you get the message to him, do you ask...
Well, they're in the middle of a messy divorce, so...
Alice to speak?
Lawyer to lawyer, one imagines, might be a swift communication route, perhaps. But I don't think you say anything publicly.
Caroline, what do you think?
Well, I'm afraid I agree with Andy. I mean, I don't know whether they're in the middle of a divorce or it's an old divorce. But either way, he's potentially invading the daughter's privacy. I mean, it doesn't really say anything much. What does it add to put that out there?
No. I think he comes out of it looking pretty... I think people make up their own minds, actually. doesn't serve him.
At this point, as if there weren't enough people involved, Bill and Fred, the other judges, So far, they've only been told that it's a personal issue for Alice. They haven't been told anything else. But they're now becoming concerned themselves. Perhaps they're thinking about their own reputations. They're getting a bit agitated, and they want to know what's going on. So they come to Greg. Greg, what do you tell them?
You tell them exactly what you've said publicly. You say, Alice won't be able to do the show, isn't going to do the show, and we're going to put someone else in to replace her.
But hold on, I'm Bill. Come on, Greg. You and I have known each other a really long time. I'm a valuable...
Not that long.
It feels like a long time.
Yeah. Well, it might not be a lot longer if you don't...
And I contribute a lot to the show. And you know that, Greg. You owe me more than that. You can't just brush me off.
And I'm not brushing you off. I'm saying we are going to put a third presenter in, another judge.
Is that all you can tell me, Greg?
I can tell you the name if we've decided, if it's fixed. I'd tell you who it is.
All right, so at this point, we are going to call on your expertise and your ability to use your mobile phones. This is your chance to have your say. I will say, by the way, I tried to sign on to the app earlier and failed, so it's an excuse if you can't do it. But the question is, do you tell, or should Greg tell, Bill and Fred the truth? Yes or no? Try to use your phones and give us a vote.
Can you explain what the truth is?
Ignore Plato over here.
Yeah. I know.
It suddenly got very philosophical.
I know, it has. It is.
There's a simple question. Do you tell Bill or Fred the truth?
Exactly.
All right, we're about to have a result. Oh, right, well, there we are. It's pretty clear that Greg is backed by the audience, so that's good. Meanwhile, things continue to escalate. The Mail Online is running a picture of Alice looking red-eyed and disheveled and extremely emotional, putting 2 and 2 together and making 5. The media are now hunting for evidence of her drinking. And they've got a rather awkward picture. The media always behaves very badly in these pictures, doesn't it? So, now, this is interesting, isn't it? The media is being sort of guided by the ex-husband and by general rumours down the wrong route. Greg, and Caroline, how do you feel about the media going down the wrong route? Caroline?
Well, from Alice's point of view, it depends what they're putting out around the story. I mean, if they're just showing a photo of her, then I wouldn't be inclined to comment. But again, it's your field. I mean, if they're saying that she's drinking and she isn't drinking, then obviously they're libelling her, but she's not going to be wanting to do anything about that at this stage. She's going to want to deal with the crisis.
So you're quite relaxed about that?
Well, I am, to be honest, yeah.
Yeah.
Looks more like a Guardian picture than a Daily News picture to me.
There's not a lot the law can do that's of any benefit in that situation. It's for these guys to deal with it.
And Andy, okay, so you've told us you've got a little bit of a sense. She's not too bothered about maybe there's a bit of drinking, whatever. What do you advise her? But now she's right in the spotlight. She's getting upset. What do you advise her?
Well, it does go back to the beginning, really. It is coloured by what her public history is on this issue, right? And if it's known, how was it known? And did she engage with it? Has she talked about it? Has she talked about her rehab? Has she kind of made it part of her story? That's going to colour, you know, where you go with it. The picture, and the picture in itself, I don't know where you begin to build an argument not to run it, other than the fact it's not a very good photograph. But and again, you come back to, well, Alice, what do you want? Right? My decision making as her advisor is absolutely led by what is it that we're trying to achieve. And in the middle of all this, what she's actually dealing with is a 17-year-old daughter. I suspect she wouldn't give a monkeys about this photograph, would be my instinct, but I might be wrong. Right. And if that's the case, then you know, we can try and plot a course.
And do you have any contact as her advisor? Do you have any contact with the tabloids and say, could you back off a bit, or do you just let
But it's the relationship bit. I mean, again, it depends.
They do appear to be
what's
behaving
the
very
impact of
badly,
this?
yeah?
Well, what's the actual impact of this? Is is it stopping her from being able to kind of see her daughter, for example, right? Is she leaving the house here en route to a clinic? I don't know. It's those kind of issues that will colour the decision.
But the picture doesn't say anything. It just says there's a load of media people and she doesn't want them to be there.
Yeah.
It's not much,
So it doesn't tell you anything.
It's not
It
much
doesn't
of a
tell
fact.
you anything about alcohol. It doesn't tell you anything about her daughter. It doesn't tell you anything.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just a picture of her because she's not doing this show. Just some,
Right.
Yeah.
So,
I think it tells you that she's just been shopping.
So, the preparations and the rehearsals are going on for the final, and there's a desperate hunt now to find a replacement judge. The obvious candidate to be the replacement judge is Helen, a celebrity who was in the frame originally when Alice was chosen. Bill and Fred, our old friends, are told that the plan is that Helen is going to replace Alice. But Bill and Fred, not content with being generally unhappy, disagree, and they say they want a different celebrity stand-in. So Bill comes back to see you, Greg.
my long, lifelong friend, as you say, comes back to see me.
The relationship is getting longer, actually.
Yes.
They say, and Bill says to you, Greg, look, mate, I understand that you couldn't say very much earlier, but now this is ridiculous. Helen is talentless. We know much better people who will have the chemistry with both me and Fred.
Bill, it's very nice to see you again. Thanks for coming to see me. But this isn't your decision, and it's nothing to do with you. I'll say that very nicely because I've known you forever. But this is not your decision. This is the production team's decision, and they've decided they want this person.
Yeah, but Greg, you know I've had doubts about the production team. You know.
I didn't know our friendship was that close. But yeah.
You know you know the way they favoured Fred over me on screen.
Oh, yeah.
You know that.
Yep.
You know that, and you've done nothing about it.
Well, you've said it.
Now is your
so they've
chance.
done it. You've said it over the years on odd occasions when we've bumped into you at various things where, if I remember rightly, you were drinking. But I don't think you'd want to get into that, would you? You wouldn't want to get into slagging off your fellow professionals. There's a decision been taken. We've got 2 days to sort this out. We've decided that's the decision. I'm sorry if you don't like it, but that will be the company's decision.
All right. And Caroline, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it is a 1 in 10,000 possibility that Bill is senior enough that there's something in his contract giving him a right to veto, but that is so unlikely.
All right. Now, to add fuel to the fire, people seem to spend all their time adding fuel to this fire, the ex-husband is now interviewed by a tabloid. He promises to spill the beans about the marriage and some behind-the-scenes stories about the show. The key allegation is that Alice was often under the influence of alcohol during recording on earlier series and also on live shows. Producers were aware of this and they turned a blind eye, he claims in the interview. Now, the tabloid's been in touch. They're about to publish. Greg, you don't actually know whether or not it's true that the production team knew about Alice drinking. If she did,
Neither do they. All they've got is an embittered ex-husband's allegation. Would you run that? No.
you wouldn't run it.
No, it's a pretty serious and significant allegation, isn't it?
Yeah.
You've got to get to the truth of it.
But sorry, what exactly wouldn't you run? So you've got the husband saying, here's the sequence of my marriage. He's a first-party witness to that.
Yeah.
He says, she came home from the studios and she was drunk, what have you. I mean, there's some direct evidence there. It's no good to say.
Okay, but we're forgetting here that the editor of this tabloid newspaper, if it's been handled properly, is aware that actually this is a pretty messy situation, right? And that children could be involved.
Yeah.
So at this point,
that's going to colour
at this
everything.
point,
The editor,
have you spoken to the editor of the tabloid?
My point about relationships, right? If you've got a relationship where you can have that kind of conversation.
So you might ring up and say, look, actually, just so you know, the child's involved.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. But that
Because
is
you would trust,
as I say, an increasingly difficult thing to do these
you
days.
trust the editor of the tabloid at that point to say,
Depends on the nature of your relationship, right? But you should be able to, particularly on an issue like this, because you're guiding them actually away from creating a real problem for themselves. Right? There's value in this conversation for them.
But if it's not true, and you haven't got any evidence of it other than the husband, if it's not true, what's the legal position?
If I'm now advising
right, you're
paper,
about to write, you're going to write a legal letter to the tabloid. What do you say?
I wouldn't, actually, because I think in that situation you're adding fuel to the fire. You're putting a lawyer in, a lawyer's letter at that point is a really bad idea because it makes it sound as though you're hiding something and you escalate it enormously. But if I'm advising the paper, one of the things, we've not only got a disgruntled ex-husband, he's making libelous allegations against a professional production company. I mean, I wouldn't go near it.
All right.
No, you've got to have some.
No, with no evidence.
Right. Okay. Okay.
Other than that she was drunk when she came home, but she may have, it's just not unknown for people to get drunk after
Yeah, and also
shows.
it's not even necessarily about whether or not she was drinking, is it? Isn't it about the subsequent behaviour?
Yeah.
That's the issue. What happened?
Okay.
How did this damage the production?
Meanwhile, I don't envy the people in the press office because the phone keeps ringing. And the next thing that happens is the press office is approached for comment on claims that producers want to replace Bill, Greg's old friend, as a judge on the next series because they want a more diverse panel, and Bill is not diverse. Bill's agent is right on the phone.
Hi, it's Mimi Lyle. Just calling because I've just had Media Eye on the phone asking about Bill's role on the show going forward. Apparently there have been discussions about changing the lineup to make the judging panel more diverse. And I'm really surprised that I've got a call like that because I would have hoped that you would have consulted both Bill and I before briefing the media on this. It's really unexpected and really damaging, and I need a call back as soon as possible.
Greg, what are you going to say?
I don't know, is it true? Am I assuming it's true? Is that a discussion going on? I would say, to Mimi, we've not been briefing anybody, which is what she's alleging. She's alleging the company's briefing. Nobody's been briefing anybody on this, and I'd leave it at that.
Okay. Now the stress...
Funny name, isn't it, Mimi Lyle? I mean,
all right.
strange agent.
So the stress of all of this, understandably, is getting to Alice, who's now being doorstepped. She thinks it might be better just to be upfront about the truth and explain publicly what happened to her daughter, what has happened to her daughter. So what should the producers tell her in this situation? Andy, what's your advice to her?
To not do that.
Yes.
It's, I think, pretty clear.
But she's getting very distressed, and
yeah, but again, it
daughter's
goes
obviously just...
right back to that kind of relationship that hopefully you'll have built over a period of time of working out what's really important to her, and that's a big step, all right? And that's also a step that you can't really reverse.
And would you say...
And it's not going to help.
Would you say
at all in
it's
terms
time
of
for her to
daughter.
say anything more, or...
No. Not on the basis of what's happened so far. No, I wouldn't. I'd be saying concentrate on the first thing that we discussed, which I think it would be the first thing we discussed, and that's the health of your daughter. That's the outcome that we're looking for here.
And we will be having a discussion with him saying exactly that.
Yeah.
Let's put a united front, let's try and persuade her not to do this, because from there lies all sorts of things that you don't want to get into, and you don't need to.
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
And in your experience, Andy, like in situations like this, we all experience it from the outside. So we read the papers, we talk about it, we sort of say how terrible it is that the papers are doing it, and then we read it. But from the inside, when you're the person in the public spotlight, do people often say, I I need to do something. I need to issue a statement.
Absolutely, yeah, because you want control, right? And that's
I need to tell my story.
It's the control piece is always there in crisis, right? You want to get hold of it, you want to influence it, and there are times
because this feels like just chaos. You're there. All this stuff is just the media is like the next story, the next story, and the next.
Yeah, except you can say, I think, even in this imagined scenario, this will pass, right? The most important thing is that you're able to say, I did my best for my daughter. Right? Headlines, the fuss, the bother, the husband, I think, will come out of this, very badly, whatever he does next. Focus on the daughter, right? And then we'll worry about you a bit later.
All stories go away in the end, except a few, and occasionally a few which we both know about. But all stories go away in the end.
They might go away with you in it, though, mightn't they?
Well, here, if she goes,
look at the BBC.
Here, if she gives an interview, you have no idea what she's going to say. That's out of control. It's out of so you would do everything you could to get her to say nothing, but you'd use, because she's employed him and she's paying him, not us now.
It doesn't help anyone.
Yeah,
at all. The only people it helps possibly is the journalists who are going to get to write the story that they want in the room.
Alan?
Yeah, well, I'm with you. There's also the daughter. She's 17. If she, apart from the harm it would do putting anything out about her medical condition, if she found out about this, she would be entitled to stop it in her own right. And that would just destroy her relationship with her mother. Equally, the father, if he was a bit more responsible, if he found out about this, he could get an injunction to stop it.
Well, what's the worst thing that could happen? It's about to happen. A journalist calls the press office and Alice's agent to say they have pictures of Alice's daughter in the garden of a private hospital, as well as quotes from a hospital insider that she was admitted for, quotes, treatment several days ago. There are rumours swirling online about the daughter's health. There are tweets naming the hospital. There's paparazzi outside the gates of the hospital. The reporter asks for comment. Andy?
It's coach and horses through the code.
Yeah.
No one's going to publish that photograph.
So,
and I think that'd be
is that right?
Straightforward
Coach and horses through,
conversation about
what?
Through Ipso.
The interesting
code,
question is, would they have published it 30 years ago, 20 years ago?
30 years ago?
Yeah.
I'm not that old, Greg.
Well, all right, 20 years. I'll get on to you. 20 years ago. Would they have published 20 years ago? No, I don't think they would.
Even when I was a trainee journalist on local newspapers,
which we can count as the...
hospitals were verboten, right?
Right, and hospitals with teenage daughters in them.
Yeah, it wouldn't be.
Now, as I understand privacy law, Caroline, it's pretty clear you can't do that.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, pre-1998, you might have run a story like that. But now that...
Well, it's a story, not the pictures.
Well, even then, you could have run the pictures because you didn't have a privacy law. I mean, you'd end up with loads of different issues that weren't legal issues, but you didn't have any privacy law in this country pre-1998.
Right.
But now that is bad on every level, from the law, from the codes. If anybody knew that was going to happen, the hospital or Alice would get an injunction like that by ringing up a judge.
Right, so it's a pretty simple legal case. If anybody rang you up and said, this is what is happening,
absolute coach.
You just send them a letter and say, it's completely out.
Yeah.
You wouldn't need shillings to do it.
You would not need shillings. I'm sure that they'd be very obliging, but you really wouldn't need them.
I could write it myself, I think.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, well, that's a clear, and maybe that's an encouraging lesson, I don't know. How do you feel about it, Andy, about the way in which the window of inquiry for tabloids has narrowed so much?
I think that there are big pluses. I think the whole debate has moved dramatically. The bit I worry about, which I touched on earlier, is the failure to communicate, right? Because I think in the end, these situations are about a bunch of human beings in a room somewhere in one office and a bunch of human beings in another room. And if they aren't able to have some kind of conversation without it being perceived as a grand conspiracy or some other a problem that's associated with it, that's not good, because a lot of these problems can be solved or at least eased through grown-up conversation, right? But that is about relationships, and that has become increasingly difficult.
I remember just after I got to the BBC, one of the Sundays ran a picture of me on holiday with being towed on a banana thing, which is a bit strange anyway.
Was it
But I mean,
An inflatable banana.
yeah, an inflatable banana.
Not just a banana.
With my two.
That would have been
Who
weird.
was with you?
With my two kids who were quite young, and I didn't care, but I rang them up. I got the press officer to ring them up and say, look, you can't do that. They're his kids. And they said, well, we didn't know they were his kids. And you say, well, I'm just going to go on a inflatable banana with anybody's kids. It's not very likely, is it? But it is interesting that
This conversation has taken a proper
I
turn.
think we'll end it there because I
It's
think
taken a
it gets-
proper turn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, that legally, they could have run that until 98.
Yeah.
Right. So, the Star Maker final goes ahead. Helen replaces Alice. She does an amazing job, despite Bill's doubts, and the audience feedback is brilliant. Bill is still resentful. He resents the fact she was booked, and he decides to leave the show. Greg gives him a sweetener deal of a series touring the Roman roads of Britain in a camper van. And it's surprisingly successful. Alice feels she has to spend more time with her daughter, and she parts company with the show. She goes on to make a documentary about teenage mental health and writes a crime novel set behind the scenes of a big entertainment show in which an apparently avuncular senior executive turns out to be unreliable. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your wisdom with us. And thank you to the panel for that fascinating discussion.